Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a Wednesday edition of the Ambassadorial Wing. And as always, I'm your host, the Ambassador. Glad y'all could tune in this evening because we are going to be covering a great little gem of a film from the early 2000s. I was actually in error. I am fallible. I goofed up. This film is actually from the early 2000s, not from the late 90s. So bad on me. I'll have to go back and fix it in the comments later. But tonight we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. And with me tonight, I've got Jane, Theory, and the Chad. Guys, thank you for coming on tonight. And Jane, this is actually your second time on the Ambassadorial Wing. Chad, I think this is your first time, so congratulations. We popped your Ambassadorial Wing cherry. So, guys, it is great to have you on with me tonight. I hope y'all enjoy yourselves. And to everybody that is in the chat right now, my moderator, Shea Storm Dragon, also my other moderator, Kathia Star. Ladies, good evening. Glad you could be here. Good to see you, Finna Wolf. Glad you are here as well. And yeah, guys, this is going to be a good one. This is going to be a fun one to talk about. So
it is.
So we'll not stand on ceremony here, Mr. Wayne. And we will just jump right on in. Yeah, Shea and everything. She's like, make sure you smash that like button, share this out for all your fans who love Final Fantasy, in particular if they are fans of this movie. And tell them to get their tuxes on over here and everything, and join the chat. So, guys, let's hit it. Final Fantasy: Spirits Within. This was honestly, a breakthrough in a lot of ways in CGI technology, and it was just. This is the first time we got CGI photorealistic human characters, and we had a top-notch voice cast for this movie. So, guys, where do you want to start? I open the floor to y'all.
I mean, it's visually stunning. I mean, to this day, I still love the visuals in this film. And also, I remember thinking that it was going to change everything in terms of movie making. So I'm actually somewhat surprised we didn't get more of this than we have.
I think this was the best video game movie until Scott Pilgrim came along. So I love this film so much.
I have to say, yes, visually this movie is honestly very stunning, and I would argue it's one of the best video game inspired movies that we've gotten. I would have to argue that maybe one of my other favorites is First Mortal Kombat, because I love the First Mortal Kombat. Second one, not so much, but the first one, yes. But that's another topic.
Fair enough, yeah.
But yeah, this one, the backstory behind this film is actually a little bit depressing, because this movie almost bankrupted Square and Sony in a lot of ways, but thankfully it has gotten legs underneath it and has become, I think, for a lot of people, whether you're a video game nut or not, it has become a cult classic. It really has. So I love this movie to death. I sat down late last night and I rewatched it. I was watching both parts and everything, the regular theatrical version, and then the one that they have on the special edition DVD that has all the blasts and boards interspersed throughout the running of the film, that shows you how they did the different shots and all like that. And I've watched all the supplemental material, the special features, the whole shoot match. I even found the little Easter egg of the Thriller short that they did with the characters, everything on this disc. Yeah, I think for a lot of us and everything, this movie, we felt like this was going to be the start of something different for CGI films.
Yeah.
Because you look at the textures of the characters, you look at the hair, and just how
skin.
Yeah, how. Go ahead, Jane, please.
No, I was just gonna say, you mentioned the hair, but the flesh, the expressions. I mean, you really, as the film went along, you came to really care about these characters as if they were human.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, and there was an argument for a while, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I don't know if this is something y'all recall or not, but there was talk for a little while that maybe this was going to be the start of them replacing real life actors with CGI characters. But in fact, that hasn't necessarily happened. But I would say that this film broke ground for some of the stuff that we've gotten in recent years, because if you consider some of the CGI work that they did for the prequel movies, or even for Rogue One, or even Thanos and Endgame and Infinity War, this movie broke that ground in a lot of ways and anything for how CGI could be employed to create photorealistic characters like actually exist with real space. I honestly, the story about this, the story within this movie is a compelling one, and it does match up with the mythos of the whole Final Fantasy series of games and everything. It's always care of it and so on, and it always has some sort of extraterrestrial element to it. So, but guys, Hank, go ahead. Your thoughts on this?
I like the story. I like the sort of corporeal / spiritual mix there, supernatural element to it, and how it was rooted in actual mythology, which I wasn't aware of. So it was it was really a deep story. It was much more than just a video game film, you know. That's what I appreciated about it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it was. I think it was phenomenal. I think early on in the movie, when the squad first encounters some phantoms, and they blow apart a statue of the Virgin Mary to get to them, I thought that was a great way of showing just how different this world is and how little there is sacred in this world in this war. Just how brutal this has been on the humans. That something like that would happen and no one would shrug.
Right.
And even later on, when Aki is talking about searching for the various spirits, and she mentions a child that's 7 years old and wants to die, and it just really paints out to you how horrible life is right now and how hopeless it is. And I thought it was amazing how this film didn't talk down or dumb down its subject matter, because at this time in 2001, video games were still thought of as being for kids. It was still, by and large, adults did not play video games. Adults did not go to see video game movies. And so here is a movie that's not talking down to the audience. That's going to be teen at the target audience is teens to young children.
Yeah.
I loved it. And it hurt me that it didn't make money, because this is what video game movies should be. As much as I love Scott Pilgrim and all its wackiness and silliness, I feel like this is what I wanted out of video games: maturity and video game stories, I should say, maturity, intelligence, a sense of heart and soul, of delivering a message but not being preachy about it. This movie was phenomenally written, amazingly directed. It has so many great shots that, despite the age of the CGI, hold up on art direction and direction of the scene itself. And I just think it is a phenomenal movie that was very worthy of Oscars and applause and being noticed, and it wasn't. And it hurt me so much to see a good movie get neglected like that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with you, because, as I said, this movie in a lot of ways was very groundbreaking. It set the bar in so many ways and everything for what could be done with video game properties. It allowed filmmakers and what have you to take these properties, find a story within them, and ultimately create something that the audience can connect with and just appreciate and connect with and everything. Because for me, this movie, it very much explores the whole idea of do certain things have a spirit? Do certain things have a soul? And that is actually a very much of an idea that is personified in this film. And it came through from the director and the creator of the Final Fantasy franchise and everything. I forget the name of the director off the top of my head and everything, but he had this whole idea of Go ahead, Chad.
Hironobu Sakaguchi.
Yeah.
He was the director as well as the main writer on the film.
Yeah, and he brought a lot of, I think, Japanese. I want to make sure I get the right culture. He brought a lot of Japanese mythology and spiritualism and spiritual thought into this project. And I think it was very, very fitting, considering a lot of the games and everything have that through line of them. I mean, if you look at 7, 8, and 9 in particular, and just going on down the road, all of the Final Fantasy games deal with the exploitation of the natural world and this whole idea of trying to maintain a balance within the natural world and everything, and nature sometimes rising up in for lack of a better word, rebellion against humanity's exploitation and abuse and everything of nature. And you very much get that feeling and everything with this movie, in particular on the side of the Phantoms and everything, because you have all those dream sequences with Aki, and then eventually with Aki and Gray and everything, and they finally finish the dream, and she finally figures out who the Phantoms are, and you finally realize this is not an invading army, as she said, they're ghosts. And to the chat, Superior Hero Reviews, welcome, sir. Glad you could pop in and everything. Hope you're doing well. But this whole concept of not just human beings have a soul, but also the planet and life in general having a soul of some sort was honestly, it was an intriguing idea for me, particularly considering the fact that I am a Christian. This idea, does everything have a soul? And I can't necessarily wholeheartedly agree with that whole idea. I can respect other cultures who would see it that way and make that leap and everything, saying the planet has a soul. There is a force at work within it that generates life. And I can that on that level, I can connect with that. I can respect that view and everything, even though I can't necessarily connect to it directly.
That's how I saw it, though, is that they were trying to capture, or what we were seeing was more of a life force. They called it spirit, phantom. It was just all names for the thing that generates life within Earth, within plants, within animals, within people.
The Gaia.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jane brings it up here in the chat and everything. You said it yourself perfectly, Jane. The concept of Gaia and so on, the Earth Mother being a real living entity was, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Everything. I think that's.
I think initially, especially at that time, people probably didn't expect to go into this film, thinking that they're going to get a real experience, a conversation about life and faith and what it all means. You expect it to be a superficial, shoot 'em up type of kill the aliens game film.
Yeah.
And it was so much more than that.
It was. But it did have good action. It did have its good action scenes, though. I think one thing about the action scene when the Phantoms invade is that when they try to take this tunnel and they say this is a risky move, this is going to be a rough ride, and there's actual consequences. That one of their team got wounded.
Yes,
I love that.
Yeah,
right.
I love that it broke the trope of them getting away scot-free. No, there was consequence to this. One of their team did get hurt and had to get left behind, and that was excellent. It just said we're breaking the tropes. We're going to, and we're breaking away from what you'd expect, and it was amazing to see. Because like now you just don't know what to expect.
Yeah, you definitely felt the danger every time. I mean, even in the beginning, when I think you were talking about this earlier, when we first see them, it's like, this is serious. These things are terrifying. And I love that element of it. And I was also going to mention, I maybe getting ahead of myself, but the dream sequences too were exceptionally well done.
They were.
And I like that you could tell the difference. You know, you knew when she was in a dream and when she wasn't. I think that was just beautiful. I don't know if you would consider that just how they shot it or the writing or what, but it was just so well done.
Well, I think that you get because there's just a little bit of distortion during the dream sequence, and especially considering the fact that they start the movie with her dream sequence,
right?
And she's standing there on the barren surface of the Phantom's home world. And the thing is, you don't know who the Phantoms are. You don't have we don't get another name for them. They're just simply known as the Phantoms. This is the name that they're given, and it's actually it's a wink and a nudge saying there's something not quite there's something otherworldly about these beings, and the fact that they take the time to really flesh out in some way the characters of the world and everything, and give them some weight and give them some heaviness and everything, and show that they are an empathetic race,
right?
But that they made a very grievous mistake. We don't know what the mistake is per se, but that they somehow caused the destruction of their home world. We don't know what great cataclysm they enacted to destroy their world and get that chunk of their world tossed out into deep space and eventually crash land on Earth. Everything in what they call the region of the Caspian Sea, which is kind of the Caspian Sea is kind of near, or it's in between Western Europe and like the Baltics and everything near Russia and the Ukraine and all that. But the thing I would say about the design of the Phantoms is, in particular with the one benevolent Phantom, they made the comment that they didn't want this one Phantom, the one that was the final spirit that they needed to gather to create the spirit wave to heal the world and everything. They didn't want it to necessarily seem menacing, but they didn't want it to seem wholly benevolent. They tried to strike a very delicate balance. But you get this. Yeah, Kathy, I know that. So I'm not trying to be disrespectful on either side. So, but this whole idea that everything, especially everything in the universe, has a spirit, is even stuff from off our own world, is a rather intriguing one, and it's one that I think was interesting to explore in this film, because we always assume that we are the only sentient beings that would have a spirit, or if you want to use the Christian connotation, have a soul.
Right.
But this movie presents the idea that all life, even extraterrestrial life, has a soul.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we lost Chad again. I guess he's got a weak connection or whatever. So, but yeah, the other thing I want to comment on is the cast of this movie. They got together
Right.
they got a top-notch cast and everything of actors and actresses to do these voice roles. And from what I understand, they spent a lot of time um,
That may have
with
been where the budget went. That and the CGI.
yeah, because if you consider some of the names you've got in this film, you've got Alec Baldwin, you've got Ming Na Wen,
Mm-hmm.
who did the voice of Aki Rosh, you've got Donald Sutherland, you've got Ving Rhames, um, you've got Steve Buscemi,
Yep.
you've got James Woods, Keith David, who plays one of the counselors. Oh, for heaven's sakes, I can't remember Perry Gilpin, I think her name was. It was the one that played Jane, the one female soldier that was part of the Deep Eyes unit. And I think she was actually, I don't know if you remember the TV show Frasier. She played Frasier's radio producer.
Yeah.
And she did this part. But yeah, this was an incredibly top notch cast, and I just when I heard the cast for this film, because I remember Ming Na from ER. Kathia, if I remember correctly, I think it's on. Yeah, Jane. Yeah, that's where I found it too. And I think it's also on Tubi. It might be on Tubi if you have if you either have a Fire Stick or if you have a PS4 or whatever, you can find them all on there. So, and they have actually the sequel to Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. But yeah, this was it blew my socks off that they got a cast this good and everything to just come in and do voice acting.
Right.
But they did such a good job with it, considering, yeah, they did such a good job with these parts. They really breathed life into these CGI characters, and you really see the wheels turning for many of them. I think one of my favorite characters personally, and this might be true for a lot of people who know this movie, excuse me, is General Hine, who was voiced by James Woods. So, Venable, thank you. Yeah, I think I'd seen it's on Amazon Video. So, yeah, if you can't find it on one of those others, you can definitely find it there. But Jane, your thoughts on the cast?
Oh, I love the cast. I think I was actually surprised because I didn't know and I didn't expect to hear the voices I was hearing. It's like, how did they get these people together? I'm not necessarily a huge Alec Baldwin fan, but he's a great actor. Steve Buscemi, you mentioned him earlier. Ving Rhames. I just expect to see so many great actors in one film like this. But I think that they saw that it could have the potential to be a game changer. And I'm still disappointed that we didn't get a flood of more films like it. But you do see the advancements in CGI. You see it with the de-aging technology. I think we're definitely going to get there, though, where you see more sort of computer-generated actors in film. And once they get the voices together, where they don't need the voice actors, that's gonna change some things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you just look at some of the stuff that they've done the last few years with CGI technology, and I know this is one that has been mentioned previously, but them doing the face replacements for Rogue One in particular with Grand Moff Tarkin and then Princess Leia at the end of Rogue One, you can see where they were inspired by the CGI, the hyper realistic CGI that was used in this film, and it just
now it doesn't matter if an actor has deceased; they can bring them back.
Yeah,
they can make like their old selves. It's great.
Yeah. So long as you get permission from the family and everything of the deceased or anything, say, hey, we'll give you a percentage of the profits from the film if we can use your loved one's likeness or whatever. So, But yeah, this film in so many ways just it laid the groundwork for what CGI technology could do in film. And the other thing I will remark upon is honestly the world building, the world that they created in this movie. While it is set in the future, you can see where they got inspired by the actual world and everything. They just kind of broke it down, aged it, and made it um, very broken and everything, and very decrepit in a lot of ways.
Right.
Because I remember there's actually a deleted scene. There was an alternate opening, if I remember correctly, for this film. It actually opens with 3 scientists or something along those lines that go to the impact crater where the asteroid or whatever from the Phantom World crashes, and you see something come up behind those 3 figures, and it just rips the soul or the spirit out of those people.
And those scenes. Oh, go ahead.
No, go, Jane. By all means, go ahead, please.
Those scenes were amazing. I mean, when I talk about the terrifying nature of these characters, when you could witness the spirit or whatever being ripped from these human beings, and their souls are screaming as they're being devoured, that was crazy.
Yeah, that was definitely intense, and I loved, honestly, the whole design of the phantoms and all the creatures from their world, because these are things we've not seen in film before. I know that they kind of took actual animals from our world and got inspired. Kathia, Crackle can be found on, if you have a PlayStation 4, or if you can. I think it's an app that you can download onto your laptop or your PC or whatever. So, and it is free. So you'll just have to sit through ads and everything during. Yeah, Jane, thank you. Yeah, it's free online. You'll just have to sit through ads or anything during the movie, but that's a small price to pay for a good film.
Yeah.
But yeah, the design of these creatures, in particular the phantoms, was actually very intriguing for me, because this was very otherworldly, obviously, because they come from another world. But you get this whole idea that they deliberately picked a color palette for the spirits of the phantoms, and obviously for our spirits, because the phantoms, they picked an orange or reddish orange color, and obviously they picked a blue color for us. There he is. He's back. All right. Hey, man.
Hey, sorry about that. Just had a bit of a Wi-Fi drop. Had to reboot the router.
That's okay. It happens. Everybody's online, so everything's going a little haywire. Everything was going haywire earlier today, so don't feel too bad.
Okay.
So, we were starting to talk about the design of the phantoms and everything, and you can, if you want to pick up there. So,
sure. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I love phantoms. I think they were. I think the aliens themselves had a very cool design. They had a very avian design, a very bird-like design. But then you get into the other phantoms themselves, the wildlife, the big dragon-like phantoms, and everything else. And there were some wild and amazing designs there. Apparently, even though I've never been able to find this, there was a chocobo phantom in the film.
Was it really?
Even though I never managed to find that particular Easter egg. That's what they said. I've never been able to see it myself. But no, they were fantastic. I love the way that they're very bestial looking and moving, and spectral, but also very menacing as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing I commented on and everything just before you came back in was the fact that they picked a very distinct color palette for not just the world, but for the characters, and particularly the characters' souls and everything, or spirits.
Okay.
Kathy, I'm sorry, I'm going to interchange. It's not meant as disrespect. Please don't at me. The ambassador is a soulist or a spiritist. I am not anti-soul or anti-spirit. But yeah, this whole idea that they picked a very distinct color pattern and everything was intriguing to me, and I think in a lot of ways it was intentional.
Oh yeah.
For the simple fact that you've got a race of aliens that have.
And
go ahead, Chad.
Yep. And one thing I wanted to get into before the internet dropped, and I was about to mention, is that in regards to the religions in this film, I thought Taoism was featured very specifically, especially in the concept that the alien's energy wave sort of cancels out the human energy wave, but at the same time, the human's energy wave, the Gaia, would cancel them out too. That was very yin and yang, in a sense that both are complementing each other, but also in confrontation with each other.
Yeah, I
thought Taoism was the belief that featured very much into this, as well as the idea of reincarnation, the sense that the spirit comes from the Gaia, returns from the Gaia, then circles back again into its life.
Right.
Into another life. Yeah. That was very much another belief that featured very prominently into the film itself. In fact, in certain Eastern religions, the idea of hell and demons is that demons feast upon souls, preventing it from ever being reincarnated again and trapping it. That's a type of Buddhist concept of hell, where your soul is trapped forever and unable to proceed through its necessary spiritual cycle.
Yeah.
So I thought that was actually an interesting interpretation, the way the alien spirits themselves would consume the human souls, but the energy from Gaia would cancel them out and erase them. It was a very interesting way of exploring those beliefs and concepts, and I thought it was amazingly well done.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that, because as you mentioned, this movie very much explores the whole idea of what happens when two opposing souls interact with one another, and what you end up happening once they're finally able to complete the spirit wave, everything with the phantom soul, after they get the other 7 spirits and everything into Aki, and then they're able to release the wave through that vehicle, and it starts to spread and starts to overwhelm all the phantom spirits. And essentially what happens is the Earth Gaia absorbs the alien Gaia and uses it to rejuvenate life onto the Earth altogether. And it is very much this idea of bringing balance back to the world, bringing life back to the world, but doing so in a way that isn't necessarily violent, but more so keeping a balance and everything between two things. Because if you think about this, Gray is very much out of his element towards the end of this movie, and it's just like him becoming, I don't know how to handle this per se. I shoot a gun. I'm good at military strategy, but dealing with science and dealing with mysticism and all this other stuff is outside of my realm of purview. But Aki and Dr. Sid are able to say, this is what we're trying to accomplish. This is what we're trying to do. And ultimately it's Gray that gives up his life to ultimately bring life back to the world. It's an act of selflessness on his behalf. And he's like, just now here at the end, when I'm starting to understand all this, don't give up on Miyaki. And he doesn't want to she doesn't want to let him go and everything. But ultimately, he's like, you need to let me go if you want this plan of yours and Dr. Sid's to succeed.
Right.
And there's a very, it's, what's the word I want to use here? It's a melancholy ending, but at the same time, it's a very hopeful ending because of Gray's and Aki's and Sid's actions. Life will start to repopulate the Earth,
exactly,
and bring it back from where it was before the Phantoms crashed on the planet. So, but yeah, while you were out, Chad, me and Jane were talking about the cast and everything, and just how much of a top-notch cast this really was, and just the fact that it was a voice cast primarily, but you had some very big names in this film and everything.
You had huge names in here. You had Keith David as one of the governors. You had James Woods, Ming-Na Wen, Kiefer Sutherland.
Actually, it was
Donald Sutherland, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Alec Baldwin. You had Roz from Frasier.
Yeah, I think her name is Perry Gilpin. I think is her name. Steve Buscemi as what's his name? I can't remember the name of the character now.
Yeah, as a Steve Buscemi character, I just call him because that's what he was. He pretty much became Steve Buscemi.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
And you had such great interplay with all the characters that I don't know if they actually had all the actors recording together and everything at the same time so that they could get that interplay. But even if they weren't, the interplay and the personalities just bouncing or interacting with one another was actually, I think, one of the strong points of this film. The fact that even though these are CGI characters we're seeing on screen, they play off each other so well. And then, of course, you've got James Woods, who I think just a few years prior had done the voice of Hades, and then he comes in and does this very menacing and very heavy General Hine. And the thing I find interesting, and you two might know this, but for those of you who are watching may not, the guy who was actually the artist who was in charge of designing General Hine, they actually decided to let him go ahead and design General Hine after his appearance instead of designing it after James Woods' appearance. I mean, it's James Woods' voice that's coming out of the actor, but it's more of the artist or the CGI artist or designer that is inspired the design and the look of General Hine. And I mean, if you look at he does bear some resemblance to Bang Na. If you look at Gray Edwards, he does bear to Alec Baldwin and so on. Dr. Sid looks a little bit like Donald Sutherland, and just down the road. But the interaction between these characters is what really draws you into this world, that makes it feel believable, that makes it feel real, even though you realize that this is just a purely CGI generated world. And I think that
phoned it in at all.
No, they really weren't and everything. I know some people might make the comment that the voice acting was a little bit stiff, a little bit wooden. But honestly, for me, I don't see it that way, because I had seen all these actors and actresses in other movies or TV shows and everything that they had been in at the time. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I can make this connection. I'm connecting with these characters. Yeah. They, for me, may not be flesh. They may not be flesh and blood, but I'm still connecting with them. These are human beings I'm seeing on screen.
When Chad was talking about that scene where she was talking about the 7-year-old girl.
Yeah, the little girl. Yeah, that was one of the spirits.
She was telling her, she was relaying to her the mythology. And the little girl just was like, you don't have to tell me a story. I'm ready to die. That was incredibly moving. That was emotional. She made me feel that. That was quality acting there. So I don't know who had those complaints, but I didn't get that.
There's a scene when General Hine and his associate drop the shield, and everything goes to hell, where his associate gets shot by a stray bullet,
Mm.
Yeah.
and he's lying on his back. He puts his hand to the wound, and you see it from his perspective. And he raises his hand; it's covered in blood, and
Mhm.
you just see General Hine looking down at him from behind the hand covered in blood, and
Mhm.
Mm.
it's just literally like you can tell he feels like the blood is on him
Yeah.
by the look on his face and the way the scene is directed and the music. And
Yeah.
even if the voice acting did sometimes fall flat, it did. The direction in scenes like that was so good.
Hmm.
It pulled you right back in the film. It was visual storytelling at its best, and
Yeah.
the
Yes.
direction was. I can't praise the direction enough. It just sold so much of the film
Hmm.
and really pulled you in there on some of these scenes. Like the entire sequence where the city is just going to hell and being ravaged by sequence where you just feel the terror
Hmm.
of what's happening.
Yeah.
And like I cannot praise this film enough. I feel like I just, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, it hurts my soul this film failed at the box office. It really did.
Yeah.
Because it deserved so much better. It
Yeah.
was Sakaguchi deserves so much better. Basically, depending on who you ask, either he was fired or he resigned after this movie failed. Final
Hmm.
Fantasy X was the last project he did for Square,
Yeah.
and it's just so sad because he was a visionary. He built
Hmm.
that company,
Yeah.
and he did not deserve to have that happen to him.
Mhm.
Yeah. And Loki, he brings up a very,
Yeah,
very good
so
point here.
every I can't praise it enough.
I honestly, I don't think it. I don't think even to today's standards, it still holds up. I mean, I watched it on our 4K TV last night, and I'm like, this still holds up.
Mhm.
This
Mhm.
is still visually stunning. This story still resonates, and I think that's why it has grown legs and everything, and it has carried on and everything since it came out in 2001. And it just honestly, Chad, I'm kind of in the same boat with you and everything. It does break my heart when you see a movie that had so much passion and energy and talent and time poured into it, and it's ignored at the box office
Mhm.
because people don't get
Mhm.
what the story that they were trying to tell. They were expecting this to be a Final Fantasy action, shoot 'em up,
Right.
bang, sword fighting type of movie. But this was a story that I think even today still resonates with people. And because it does, in a lot of ways, it speaks to this idea of what is there after I close my eyes to this world? Is there anything after? And for myself, I believe there is something after we close
Mhm.
our eyes to this world and we do pass on. And I'm not so narrow-minded in vision
I
or
agree, and much
or
more.
thought.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I'm not so narrow-minded in vision or my worldview to recognize and accept other perspectives on matters of faith or spiritual belief. Even though I am a 21st century Christian, I can respect the viewpoints of other faiths or other
Mhm.
belief systems and say yours is just as valid as mine, though I lean differently in how I
Mhm.
view things. But I can see what Sakaguchi and the rest of the team that worked on this movie were trying to communicate.
I like that they
And
explored that conversation in the film, though. You did have the humans,
Yeah.
sort of
mhm,
going back and forth about whether this was real, whether it was fake, whether it was mythology, whether they were having the same conversation that we have today.
Loki brings up a good idea. Yeah, I think that would have been. I think that would have been a. That would have been an interesting title, and that could have changed how this whole movie was perceived and was marketed and so on, and received by the public.
Possibly.
So, I mean, it's a small thing, whatever. But
Very,
yeah, go ahead, Chad.
So I said this before we began. I'm just going to say it now that I cut my teeth on Final Fantasy on the original black and white Game Boy.
Mm-hmm.
And so going into this film, I think there was no way I wasn't going to like it, having been a fan of Final Fantasy for that long. But seeing what came out of it and the amount of respect and passion and clear love and talent, and then to come away from that and to see my fellow gamers say, I didn't like it, it didn't have Cloud or Squall in it, it made me feel ashamed to be a gamer. It made me want to look at my fellow gamers and say, this is probably one of the most intelligent films of the year.
Yep.
And the deciding factor is whether or not it has Cloud in it for you. Right? Seriously, brah? Seriously?
Yeah. I mean,
but that was common. That was serious. That was common on the message boards at the time, and that was common I had people working at Blockbuster. Remember Blockbuster Video?
Oh yes.
I had friends working there, and that's what they were saying, and it just hurt to see my fellow gamers act like that. Just be like, dude, they gave you something so good, and you gotta dismiss it like that.
I mean, I get the disappointment because I do like those characters, but
yes,
you have to understand it was something different, and they just weren't ready. They weren't. I think the comment before about changing the name, that probably would have been the best route to take. Because
it probably would have, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's another thing, and this is something I did want to remark upon. And I know it's something that has been spoken of and everything in the last several years, or at least since 2015. This whole concept of we've never had strong female characters in movies before. Excuse me? Aki Ross?
Yeah.
She's not even a flesh and blood character, and she has more depth and more relatability than, well, excuse me for throwing just a smidgen of shade here, Ray.
Right.
Yeah. I think the SJWs hold it against her that she posed for Maxim.
Who? Ming Na?
Yeah, no. To promote Final Fantasy Spirits Within, Square released a picture of Aki in a bikini for Maxim.
Oh, okay. I guess I missed that.
Yeah.
I guess I missed that.
Look it up. Look up Aki Ross Maxim. It's like pretty much a string bikini and.
Okay, I'll have to do that later.
Yeah.
Well,
and suddenly all the guys in the chat have left for a few minutes. Yeah, and not only Aki though, you also had, I keep forgetting her name.
Jane.
Jane. Jane was amazing. Like, she was the pilot. She was also a combat specialist. She took no shit from Neil.
And that was his name. Yeah.
Yeah, and she also called out Aki for doing some kind of stupid stuff at times.
Yes, she did. She gave just as well as she took and everything. And that was the beautiful thing about this movie. All the soldiers were on the same level. Now, yeah, you had General Hine and everything, who's kind of a smarmy, arrogant jerk, but at the same time, he was a general. You do kind of have to have a big head to be a general. But, this whole idea of we need more female characters, strong female characters in cinema. I'm sorry, you've had it ever since cinema started.
Yeah.
This is not. you're not beating, you're not presenting anything, you're not presenting a new argument. It's just something that you want to latch onto now to seem hip. There,
Yeah,
I went there. I said,
there's no new ground here.
Whenever the
I went
SJW
there.
say that, I want to hit them with a Klaatu Barata Nikto, bitches.
Yeah, from
Day
They
There
There
Stood Still.
Stood Still. Great movie.
Yeah.
Patricia Neal. Yeah, she was a great actress for her day.
She was a great character too. She ran a boarding house and pretty much was the only person that was accepting Klaatu on the level. And was his biggest supporter, and pretty much single-handedly saved the planet from Gort when he went off the chain.
Oh,
and I was like, oh, there's no strong women in movies. It's like Klaatu Barada Nikto.
Yeah, she's staying. Yeah, that might be one I have to review down the road and everything, because I love the original Day There Stood Still. I didn't care. I didn't care for the remake. I'm not saying it was bad, but I'm not saying that it was altogether bad. But I prefer the original, because the original is much more relatable. It has a message that is much more timeless. Agreed. And it carries on more so than the message that they had in the remake with Keanu Reeves. Now, am I saying that Keanu Reeves did a bad job? No, I'm not saying he did a bad job. He did the best he could with the script that he was given. Oftentimes, I do not fault the actors for their performance in a movie.
Right.
You can only do so much with what you're given, and sometimes the actors are not given much. And I think a lot of people throwing shade at actors rather than throwing shade, or okay, not throwing shade, but calling out the actors. They can only do what they are given. And kind of going back on track here with what we're talking about, these actors and actresses, they were given a lot, and I think they really nailed the mark in so many ways for this film. I mean, I think, Jane, it was you that brought up, or maybe it was you, Chad. I sometimes get my wires crossed. Forgive me. Okay. But they were talking. There was that exchange in Dr. Sid's lab there in New York and everything, the barrier city for New York, and he's talking about Galileo and the fact that Galileo was persecuted because he said that the Earth was not the center of the universe, and in fact the sun was, not the universe, but the solar system, and that the Earth revolved around the sun. Sid says it perfectly. Our ideas right now are unpopular. The world's not ready for them, but eventually someday they maybe will be. And he burns his diary. And he encourages Aki to do the same. But unfortunately, she doesn't get around to it because she's trying to collect all these spirits, and they come across the dream file and everything of her dream where she's dreamt about the phantoms. And Hein uses that evidence to convince the council that she's been co-opted. And just, I find it interesting that in this movie, we've evolved or advanced enough in technology that we can actually record our dreams now. I mean, that's something that's something that's completely different that I don't think we've ever seen in cinema before. And I don't think we've seen it since, to the best of my knowledge.
What was that? There was one film. I can't remember the name of it. But the funny thing is, they are using modern technology now to try to use your neural network to piece together what you're envisioning in your mind onto a computer screen.
Really?
They are advancing that technology. Yeah. So there may come a time soon.
Who knows? Maybe somebody was inspired by some of the stuff that they did in Final Fantasy Spirits Within to do this. Yeah, and Speaker, I can understand anything what you're saying and everything. I've had stuff freeze up on me. I was trying to actually download the thumbnails for this stream and my one for Saturday night, and my computer kept acting stupid. I'm like, I'm about to go phantom on you, computer. Don't make me do it. I'll reach out my tentacles and smash you. But yeah, that was honestly a very interesting concept to me, that we have advanced far enough in technology that we can not only build these barrier cities, we've got this advanced weaponry, we've got these advanced ships and everything, like the big boa and the other smaller transport. And I love how this is all feasible. It could all feasibly happen. We could advance. Hopefully, we'll never have to deal with a dead alien race crash landing on our planet and wiping out practically all life. But the thing I love about this film is they make all the technology seem feasible. I mean, they make it seem feasible. They make it seem logical, and I love the design of it. I love the design of the deep eyes and all the military's armor and the guns and everything. They're very realistic.
Yeah.
The Quattro, that one spherical ship that Aki and Gray are in and everything at the end of the movie, and so on. This all felt like a lived-in world, obviously. But for a CGI movie, it really feels like it's a lived-in world because you see the skeletal remains of the people sitting in the vehicles or sitting in their buildings, and you're just like, geez,
right?
These people were just snatched up in the blink of an eye, and nobody has been able to come back and give the remains a proper burial. And Chad, I think it was you that brought this up. This was anytime you go outside the barrier, it's a risk.
Mm-hmm.
It's dangerous. And they break this movie down and everything. You start off with Aki's Adventure A, I think they call it, and then you have Aki's Adventure B, and then ultimately Aki's Adventure C. Shea, you would think that, but at the same time, it does have a very hopeful message to it. And I think Shea was saying this movie sounds depressing. It does. In some ways, it is a bit depressing, but at the same time, you ultimately have a very hopeful conclusion to it. And you have, honestly, I think you have a good bit of, Jane, you said perfect. Thank you. But this world felt real, even though it was CGI.
Mm-hmm.
And it just... It sinks you in. This is another part of that just grabs you and says, "Come on, you're coming into this world. It may look grim and gray, but it's actually really interesting." And I think the humor amongst the characters brings that sense of levity that's very much needed for a film like this.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on a live action remake?
I just want to say I would definitely wouldn't call it depressing. I would call it gripping and engrossing because it starts off as a mystery, and as the mystery gets further developed and the world gets further built up, you get to see how bleak it is, but you also get to see that yes, there is hope, and that there are people fighting for that. And because the threat is so immense, you root for the heroes and cheer for them even more. And that's one thing that a lot of films, like say the new Star Wars trilogy, don't get. For a hero to matter, they have to be up against something unimaginably devastating. It has to be a handicap match. They have to have every possibility of losing, but still pull through because of tenacity and heart and grit and their will. And that's what this movie is. That the heroes, they don't quit no matter how bad it is. And that's where the hope and optimism and good feelings come from seeing them go through all of these dire situations, but not get beat down.
Yeah. And the one thing we haven't touched upon as of yet, I mean, is the antagonist of the story. And I know you could make the argument that the antagonist is the Phantoms, but I think the real antagonist of the film is General Hine.
Oh, yeah.
And I love, this is a character that you love to hate. But at the same time, he's a very compelling antagonist. He's very determined. He's very driven. He's narrow-minded in a manner of speaking, but he also has some tragedy in his life, which gives him a sense of empathy because he's talking with his second in command and everything there in his office, and he's holding that picture of his wife and daughter, and I think they signed it or something, and you hear him telling the story about him watching his wife and daughter just collapse for no apparent reason, and you feel like up to this point this guy's been kind of a jerk, but honestly I can understand where he's coming from now. He's looking at this whole situation from a different perspective, and while it's a destructive one, in a lot of ways it's very relatable for a lot of us. We as human beings have that, I think, that inborn need for retribution or revenge, particularly when we are grievously harmed. And he was very much grievously harmed in this film. And he's going to do whatever it takes to make things right.
General Hein is, I mentioned previously the symbolism about the blood being on him. When you see his friend raise his blood-covered hand and see General Hein over that. There's another amazing scene right after that, and which, again, is full of symbolism, where you see General Hein alone in space in a shuttle.
Yeah.
And you just hear the click of a revolver repeatedly, slowly. And you see bullets floating in the air, and you know he's playing Russian roulette. You know, and that he wants to kill himself for what he did. And just as he's about to pull that trigger one final time, the call comes in from the council saying that, you know what, we've given you Zeus. And then you see Zeus, and it looks like a massive revolver. And again, there's that symbolism. It's like he's still going to kill himself. He's just been given a much bigger gun and going to take a lot more people with him. And again, there's that beautiful direction that I love in this film, the symbolism, the visual storytelling, that says so much without a word. And it's like he is destructive, but he's self-destructive, and he just doesn't realize it. To him, he sees himself as the person trying to kill the phantoms no matter the cost. But there's that thing, no matter the cost.
Right.
And he's just, in the end, he just ends up killing so many more people and saving no one.
Yeah, very true.
And he's ultimately a tragic character in the sense that he wrote his own fate. And yes, we can see where he comes from, but he's still the Nietzschean fanatic. He looked into the abyss looked back and said, "Hello, dinner."
Yep, very much.
Yeah, so, but I do think he's a good villain.
He is. He's a very compelling villain. The simple fact that, as I mentioned, empathetic, you can connect with him. And I just want to speak about the design of the Zeus cannon because as I mentioned, I was watching the special features for this, and they initially were going to have the Zeus designed after another famous super weapon from a galaxy far, far away, but then they decided, let's go with a different direction, and they did a redesign. And honestly, I do like the design of the Zeus cannon. It does look like something that we could potentially build and everything. And it's, as Chad, as you said, it looks like a giant revolver or a giant rifle in a lot of ways. And it's basically just a massive super laser.
Fun fact, Sakaguchi is a massive Star Wars fan.
That doesn't surprise me.
That's why Final Fantasy has recurring characters named Biggs and Wedge.
That doesn't surprise me either. Well, something that I brought up when we first started, when I was talking about Final Fantasy IX, they actually use it's a reference. It's a reference back to Phantom Menace when Yoda's talking to Anakin there in the council room. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering, and the big cosmic being at the end of Final Fantasy IX uses that they use that particular line for the creature or the cosmic being. But this movie in a lot of ways has stuck with me for the last 19 years, because next year we'll celebrate 20 years of it being around. And I think the fact that it still sticks with not just gamers, but people who just love CGI film or CGI movies, they refer back to this as like the granddaddy of doing photorealistic CGI characters. And we haven't gotten anything on this level since then. But I would be very intrigued to see somebody take another stab. Yeah, speaking for the dead. Yeah, very. Yeah, he brings up Churchill, and yeah, you kind of get that mindset from Hein: victory at all costs. And because all the technicians there on the Zeus station are saying, "General, the system won't let you fire again," and he's like, "Yeah, well, I've got a way around that," and then he ends up overloading the system and blowing it sky high.
Right.
And ultimately,
and his last words are, "It must be done."
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's that single-mindedness of Hein and everything, because he doesn't care what it takes. He's going to avenge his wife and daughter. I mean, I think in a manner of speaking, he does care about bringing life back to the world, but he doesn't see the bigger picture of what the scientific field could do. It doesn't always take a cudgel or a sword or a gun to fix things. Sometimes it just takes a strong scientific mind, and that's what you have with Aki and Sid. They're two very strong scientific minds, and they're able to. I love the whole dynamic between Aki and Sid and everything throughout this whole movie, and in particular right after, that one line when Sid says, "I'll be damned if you're going to outlive me, or I'm going to bury you," or something along those lines.
If you're going to die before me.
Yeah. Because with all truth and everything, Sid's the older individual here. He doesn't have a problem giving up his life for others, but Aki's the younger of the two, but she's just as doggedly driven to Speaker Churchill wasn't a crazy fanatic. General Hein was, but yeah, absolutely.
I like that line that Aki said too about no one's young anymore, which speaks to how a lot of young people would feel going through a post-apocalyptic pandemic situation.
I love the exchange that comes before that, where he's like, "Look, just stay away from your friend the Colonel, all right?" And she's like, "What do you mean? He saves your life, you save his life, this leads to that. I was young too, you know. I know where this is going."
Yeah. But the crazy thing is, it's ultimately Aki and Gray rebuilding their relationship that leads to him making the sacrificial act and getting the ultimate victory for everyone. But the thing is, it isn't the strong male just working alone. He worked with Aki, he worked with Sid, but he made that leap and said, "Look, I finally understand what you're trying to tell me. Let me do this. Let me go. Let me do this so that you can have a world to live in."
And one thing
that could have been. No, go ahead, Chad.
One thing I appreciated, and I think you kind of have to come from this era to understand why. I like how they let it slip that basically when Gray is talking about when Aki left, that I woke up and you were gone. And it's just and it's basically just spelling it out for you. They have a sexual relationship.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason I appreciate that is that if you come from that era, censorship in animated films was a major thing.
Oh yeah.
And writers had to be very slick to get around censorship at that time. So I appreciated that they were able to get that line in without the censors blocking them from
I
doing
don't think it
that.
was necessary though. I mean, from the moment he took his helmet off, you could tell. From the moment, I think the females had no problem identifying that that's what was going on.
Oh yeah, I mean, for me, it wasn't a major point, but I can respect and I can understand and everything the fact that they were able to insinuate in a very a in a very subtle way that Aki and Gray did have a very deep and obviously a physical relationship because they're both adults, they're not kids, and this was played this was a movie, I think, in a lot of ways, more so for late teens and 20 somethings and maybe even 30 somethings, more so than it was for what I think everybody else perceived a Final Fantasy movie was geared towards, and that was gamers. Because nowadays, gamers encompasses such a broad demographic because you've got people my age, you've got people, I'm in my 40s.
Same here.
Okay. And you've got people younger than me who are gamers, but you've even got people that are seemingly in like their 50s that are still gaming. I mean, you see it online. You see older people playing games like World of Warcraft or playing retro gaming or going to these retro arcades that are around or pulling up or have if you have a PlayStation 4, you can pull up the old Atari games and you can play them. And they're introducing them to their kids and their grandkids, or maybe even if they have them, great grandkids. And the term gamer, it doesn't just point to kids in their adolescence or their teens or their 20s. Gamer means a lot.
Well, Generation Z never stopped, though. That means that was the generation that started it, and they're not going to stop playing video games. You know,
I mean, I mean, I had my uncle and his second wife gave me their Atari, and this is the Atari 2600, and I played that thing to death. Quite literally, I killed it. I feel a little guilty, and I told my uncle, I killed your Atari. He's like, it's okay. It was old. Did you enjoy it? I was like, oh yeah. I was like, I wholeheartedly enjoyed it. He's like, well, it's okay. No worries. Yeah. And then I eventually got. Go ahead, Jane.
I was just gonna say, I think my older siblings' Atari is still in the house somewhere.
I'm Generation X. I remember the Atari 2600 all the way, and I've been gaming from then all the way up until now. And but the thing is, in 2001, the stigma was gamers were still at the oldest, maybe older teens or very, very young 20-somethings. The stigma was there wasn't adult gamers around. So again, that's why I was surprised, and to this day I'm still grateful they managed to sneak that line in and give the film a little extra maturity, because that's something that did not happen in animation very often. The modern Dragon Ball Z audience will never have to live with another going to another dimension when someone is killed. That's what you had to deal with in the 90s when you were an anime fan. I still remember that Pioneer dub, and because I had heard about Dragon Ball Z in gaming magazines in the Japanese section, so I knew that people were dying in this anime. And when I saw the Pioneer dub, they're like, oh, they didn't die, they just went to another dimension. Oh, those pilots are fine. I can see their parachutes. I was like, oh my god, what did they do? And that was how heavy censorship was for gaming and animation at that time. Which is why I was always so happy when writers were able to sneak a little something extra in there, especially with that line. So, and that's another reason why I love this film so much.
Yeah, because this movie deals with a lot of heavy stuff that I don't think teenagers, unless they're incredibly mature mentally or spiritually or what have you, could connect with. But for someone my age, because in the in the 2000s, I was going into my 20s and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a movie that I saw the trailer, as I was telling you and Jane and everything before. I saw the trailer for this in theaters, and I was like, holy crap, this is going to be good. I mean, this is going to be really good. And I went to finally go see it in theaters, and I'm like, and then I left, and I was like, yeah, I'm glad I watched this. I can't wait for this to come out on video. And that was back when video was still VHS. We were just a few years away from DVD. We hadn't gotten there yet, but I was like, when we would go to Blockbuster and everything, me and my mom and everything, and I would rent Final Fantasy Spirits Within, and she looked at me and she's like, what is this about? I was like, why don't you sit down with me and watch it?
Yeah.
Now, picture my mother is in her 70s now, so subtract 20 years, she was in her 50s, give or take, in her mid 50s. And I have her sit down with me, and it's after we both got off work one night and everything, because this is something we both worked at the time. And we got home, and I was like, okay, we're going to watch this. And we finished it. I looked at her. I was like, what'd you think? She's like, it was different. I was like,
yep.
I was like, did you like it? She's like, yes. She's like, I really did like it. She's like, those weren't. Now, my mom's not complete. She's not really tech savvy. She really isn't now. But she's like, that was all CGI, right? I was like, yeah, that was all computer generated characters and everything. Kind of like I was like, think of it as really high definition cartoons. And she's like, okay. She's like, I can make that. She's like, I can make that. She's like, I can make that leap. And the Gilkman, welcome, sir. I don't think I've ever seen you in my chat, so welcome to the Ambassadorial wing. Glad you could tune in tonight. Hope you enjoy everything the discussion. So we're talking Final Fantasy Spirits Within. So Jane, I guess this is a friend of yours?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Gilkman, welcome to the channel. Welcome to the stream. Glad you could, like I said, glad you could tune in. But yeah, making that connection from a 20-something like myself to a 50-year-old, my mom, and everything. And I think if my father had been alive, he would have really dug this too. This would be, my dad was a huge sci-fi and fantasy nut. He wasn't so much a gamer because my mom and dad, they were from the baby boom generation. Video games to them were very, very foreign. All they knew is that I liked them. Well, my mom primarily knew that I liked them. So the fact that I could get my mom to sit down with me and watch this movie and she enjoy it, I considered that a huge, huge win. So,
and I think too, there's been this resurgence too. That's part of it. I think I said earlier Gen Z. I meant Gen X, but
yeah,
what I was trying to say was that I think that's the generation that started with these games, and I think that you're seeing more gaming film and television shows, and that may be causing people to look back at their youth and say, look, you know what? I enjoyed this as a kid or as a younger person, and I'm going to pick it back up because that's what I'm seeing more of. I mean, when you go on Twitch and some of these channels where people are live streaming gaming, you see a lot of people who are in their 40s and 50s. It's not just 20, 30 teenagers and stuff. So,
yeah, and this movie really, although I know it almost bankrupted the two studios that tried to put it together, but really brought to the forefront what CGI technology could do. And I know this is a point we've already made, but it not only that, but it gave some legitimacy to the whole concept of video game movies, that you could take a video game property and adapt it into a film that was entertaining and compelling and could explore deep themes like spiritualism and relationships or anything and what have you, and do it on not on a mature level, because up until this point animation was seen as more or less purely kids stuff.
Mhm.
This movie really gave you the idea that CGI technology, CGI cinema could tackle heavier concepts and ideas and do it in a way that was entertaining and compelling and relatable to people.
Yes.
So that for me was the biggest thing.
And a better
And
story than what we're getting in a lot of stuff today. That's why I think it's
Yeah.
still holds up.
Absolutely. It was one of the reasons that I latched on so hard when anime began to come forward in the mid 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Because even with some of these dubs, you could see in the animation that this was concepts and subject matter that was miles ahead of what all Western studios were doing. And I remember in Sailor Moon, characters died brutally, tragically, sadly. You had a further anime like Technoman, Space Knight Tekkaman Blade, and um, I don't. And eventually, Dragon Ball did get a proper dub, which again showed the death and brutality that was happening on screen. And again, this was all miles ahead of what Western animation would show. And you just got the idea that these studios, they were going to go there. They were going to explore this subject matter. They were going to push the envelope a lot further. And that's what drew a lot of people like me into anime, to see how far these studios would go. And I think Final Fantasy Spirits Within, it had such a sense of intellect and maturity and thoughtfulness that even in anime is pretty rare. And there was such a clear passion and devotion to making this as excellent as possible.
Yes.
That absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
This was, as I think we've mentioned already, very much a labor of love for Sakaguchi. And because if I remember his backstory accurately, and Chad and Jane, you might be able to back me up on this or correct me where I'm wrong. His mother had died tragically as well to some point, or I don't remember the exact circumstances, but his mother had passed on when he was relatively young. And he had carried this whole idea of that her spirit endured regardless. And he kind of carried that throughout his entire life. And it inspired a lot of the concepts and ideas within the Final Fantasy video game series. This whole idea of the Phantom Star, where life in the universe did carry on and everything after death. And, you know, for me, this was not my first exposure to heavy themes and heavy ideas in animation, whether it's CGI or just traditional anime, or either Japanese anime or Western animation, because this is one I'm going to eventually cover, and we can talk a little bit here. But I remember watching Akira on VHS because all my friends were talking about it. And this was in the 90s. I was in high school in the 90s. And I finally went and picked up a copy of Akira on VHS. And I sat down and I watched it. And I was like, holy crap. This has got violence. It's got grotesque violence. It's dealing with very heavy subject matter. It's got a near sexual assault, which I was not accustomed to whatsoever. But I finally got to read the manga of Akira, and I was like, okay, they had to change this for the cinema, for the movie, because the manga itself is so massive. I don't know if either one of you have ever read
I have.
Akira. Okay, then Chad, you can follow me here.
Mhm.
The story within the Akira, as they say it, manga is so broad that they had to shrink it down in some parts to make it relatable.
Mhm.
And even though we never see Akira on screen, but except for a few minutes towards the end and everything, and some flashbacks, it still worked because that motorcycle that the one guy had is just so it has become an icon of anime.
It has, yes.
Even here in the United States, it is. Akira is like the benchmark. It was everybody's first anime that they ever watched, and to see the line of progression from Akira to Final Fantasy, and see all the themes that these two movies tackle, these two properties tackle, is so intense for some people. I can, I agree with you. The people making the comments that we didn't have X character in this movie, it stinks.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not the biggest expert on Final Fantasy to any extent. Like I said, the only games that I have played all the way through are 9 and a little bit of 15. Those are the only two that I've actually had any time to sit down and play. And I'm, like I said, I'm going to go get the remake of 7 as soon as I can. But the fact that this movie tackles such heavy subject matter, and it just, at the time, I think, not for everybody, but I think for a lot of people, it just kind of went clear over their heads. And people were just like, this isn't Final Fantasy. I'm thinking, yes, it is. You've got the scientist who's the strong lead. You've got the soldiers. You've got the love interest. You've got the other scientist and Dr. Sid, who's kind of quirky and silly, kind of like, I don't want to make a one-to-one comparison of Dr. Sid and Vivi from Final Fantasy IX, but I don't think that's. I think that's about as close a connection, unless Chad or Jane, a better connection from another character from the other Final Fantasy games than I do. But this has the structure of a Final Fantasy game in some ways. It has the themes of the games in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't have the characters that you recognize, but it has characters that you can relate to. And that's what's compelling about it, aside from the story itself.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, I mean,
no, I agree.
Like complaining that Rogue One isn't Star Wars. I mean, yeah.
Rogue One is Star Wars.
So one thing I want to just mention here is that one thing that you can see or tell that Japan took the video game storytelling much more seriously. Did any of you ever see the Street Fighter anime movie?
I have seen bits and pieces of it, but I've never seen it all the way through.
Jane?
Let me check real quick. I can never remember. No, I haven't seen that.
I would recommend looking at it. I think you might be able to find it on YouTube, but it's a amazing bad movie. But at the same time, I mean, the parts of it that are great are fantastic, and it's violent and brutal and absolutely insanely stupid and stupidly insane at the same time. But yeah, it does have these brutal and mature and incredibly dark moments. Mm-hmm. And I remember watching it in 1997 and just going, this is why I love anime.
Yep.
Because it'll take these simple and kid-friendly concepts and just say, okay, let's turn it up to 11 and and then turn it up higher.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what made me a fan of Asian storytelling, that they will not soft soap children's entertainment. They will still put adult themes in there so that children can deal with these concepts in life when it gets there. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, that's a great thing about anime and a great way to connect the storytelling, because it's still the same how do you say, structure or the same format
Yeah.
where it's going to go there and it's going to get deep, it's going to get thoughtful, it's going to get complex, it's going to get mature, but it's still going to entertain you.
Oh yeah.
And I would still recommend this, and I would recommend this movie to any kid around early teens. Really, I think they'd be able to process it and get into it so long as they enter it with an open mind.
Yeah. I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Because the thing that I find interesting in the last several years, ever since Final Fantasy Spirits Within came out, you saw a lot of studios looking at animation at telling heavier stories and having heavier themes. And I don't know if this is necessarily a logical leap, but I think it's a leap that does have some validity to it. If you look at the themes from the first Shrek movie, in some ways that is dealing with some very heavy themes of what is considered normal or abnormal, anything in terms of relationships and in terms of how people relate to each other. Because you have a very unconventional love story in Shrek. And the fact that you've got an unlikely hero in Shrek, you have a very unlikely love interest in Fiona, you've got the little donkey who's the comic relief, but at the same time, he has a little bit of a tragic backstory himself. And this movie just it hits you right in the feels and everything, as the saying goes. And it introduces the idea of what is considered beautiful, what is considered a normal relationship,
Right.
and so on. And I think the fact that Final Fantasy did go dark, it did go heavy. And here's the thing that I think some people from the gaming community forget. Final Fantasy, at least when you start with 7 and everything, when you go to the CD disc and everything, and they start doing the heavier and bigger stories,
Yeah.
the subject material in the Final Fantasy games from 7 on does deal with heavier themes than is normal for video games. This isn't just hero versus villain, good guy versus bad guy, dark versus light, or anything like that. This is from my point of reference. Final Fantasy IX had a very deep and a very heart-wrenching story to it. Even though the characters aren't voiced, you get it through the cinematics, you get it through the cutscenes, you see the expressions on the characters' faces, and even though it wasn't the best CGI at the time, you still get that feeling of weight and heaviness and sorrow and grief and sometimes anger from the characters, and humor and levity, and just the whole spectrum of human emotion from these characters in a video game. And for me, Final Fantasy IX had, I think, one of the most broad and sweeping stories I had seen in a video games before, since everything I had started playing video games of any type. Because I had played a lot of side scrollers, which was normal because that was all that we had at the time for a lot of the major consoles. But the story that I got from Final Fantasy IX was a lot more than I expected. And when I went to see this movie, when I went to see Final Fantasy Spirits Within, I was like, I can see the lines. I can see the threads that they pulled from the games and inserted into this movie, or just were carrying those same threads over into this movie. And Chad, as you said, you just have to sit there and shake your head in shame when you've got gamers or people who may not necessarily follow the story, and you have to realize this is a story from a different culture. This is a very Asian inspired, or I think that would be an accurate cultural term, story that I think if you have that anybody can sit down and relate to on any level.
Agreed.
And speaking for myself and going a little bit personal and everything, the fact that I lost my father at a young age and everything, I was 7 years old when he passed. And this whole idea of his spirit enduring after death. I mean, as I've said, I'm a Christian. I believe he's in heaven. He is saved. He was saved before he passed. Had been a believer the majority of his life. This whole idea of his spirit waiting for me when I go is something that I can relate to. And this movie very much speaks to the endurance of. Okay, that's the thing about Speaker and everything. He's got a really good sense of humor.
Yeah.
But this whole idea of the spirit enduring after death isn't just a Western idea, it is an idea across all cultures.
Exactly.
There's just different expressions of it. And I think what Sakaguchi did is he took his own personal tragedy and put it into these games and into this movie as an expression of that. And one of the really beautiful moments from this movie that I love is when they are out in the wasteland on Earth and they see the hawk and everything above everything looking down and I forget who asks what's it doing out here, and Aki makes the comment, waiting for life to return. I think that is a very poignant and a very beautiful moment, because not all of life on Earth has been completely extinguished, obviously.
Right.
But you have that one lone hawk. I'm assuming it's a hawk. It looks like one. The screech sounds like a hawk's cry and everything. Waiting for life to return to the world. It's holding on, just like everybody else is, holding on for dear life. And it's the selfless act of, it's the actions of everybody, of the Deep Eyes, of Aki, of Sid, of Gray, that ultimately brings life back into the world. But it's done in a non-violent way. It's done in a very, I don't want to say passive, but that's the best word I can think of. If y'all can think of a better one, please.
I would say subtle.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that. Subtle and everything. It is a bringing life back into the world not through confrontation, but through reason and rationality and subtlety rather than force.
Right.
And Ambassador, one thing I want to just touch on is that Final Fantasy began to get that mature around the 6th entry.
Did it? Okay.
And if you've there's one sequence in there where in the video game the Emperor slits a woman's throat so he can raise her baby as a weapon.
Oh, dang.
And it's described only in text because again, this is 60-bit graphics, but again, he slit a woman's throat to use her baby as a weapon. It's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And so I have to recommend giving that game a try because just the intro alone still blows me away with the mood it manages to set with the music and the graphics at the time. You really get the impression that they're pushing 16-bit as far as it can go.
Yep.
And it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on it from this day because I played it back in the 90s on my Super NES when it was Final Fantasy 3.
Yeah.
But I still think the game holds up.
Okay.
And it still has some of its darkest subject matter. The main villain, a friend of mine described it perfectly as what would happen if you gave the Joker godlike powers.
Oh, good grief.
Yeah.
Well, I think they've actually tackled that subject in a couple of storybook or comic book lines and everything where he does get godlike power, and it's
Emperor Joker. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that story too. I loved it.
Yeah, that's absolutely frightening.
Yeah.
So Well, we're just over an hour and a half. I think we've pretty well dissected this film. If there's do you guys have any other thing? Unless there's something else y'all want to talk about, I'm all for it and everything. So
So I would say
covered it.
I would say Advent Children. What were your thoughts? What was your thoughts on that movie?
I thoroughly enjoyed it. I
Okay.
really did. But like I said, I want to leave that one for Loki and everything because he's wanting to tackle that after he does after he gets done playing the remake of Seven and everything. But overall, I will just say briefly, I got it as a birthday present because I loved Final Fantasy. I loved the first movie. I had it and everything, and I've watched it ad nauseum. I love the music. I love the continuation of the story. I love the progression of the characters. I found the reintroduction of Sephiroth a very intriguing one. I enjoyed the fact that they did have the the Bahamut creature there at the end. I won't lie. When you get to that scene and everything towards the end where all the characters are there with Cloud and they're giving him that extra boost and that extra boost and that extra boost up into the clouds and everything. Mm-hmm. And I get just a little choked up and I'm like, go show the world the first rate dragon slayer you are, Cloud. Go kill the dragon. And then you see the spirit of Aerith as that last hand up. And it's beautiful.
All right.
I'm sorry. No, well, I'll be a little real here for just a minute. Seeing Aerith's death and everything in the game really hit me, and I have heard various renditions of Aerith's theme on YouTube. I've listened to videos and everything, and all right, Loki. Aerith? Sorry. That piece of music they call Aerith's theme reminds me in a lot of ways of my grandmother. Mm. And my grandmother helped raise me after my father passed. And that piece of music is so beautiful and so heartbreaking at the same time. It reminds me of my grandmother's life because she had a very hard life, but she had a lot of happiness in it too. And that piece of music called Aerith's Theme does bring a tear to my eye. And seeing Aerith at the end of Advent Children, it evokes a very personal, and one that I won't share here, a very personal memory for me of my grandmother. Because my grandmother was an extraordinary woman, and in a lot of ways, I can see that connection from Aerith to her. She was exceptional in her own way, and she was unique, just as Aerith was. So, and yes, the ambassador does shed tears. But yeah, honestly, Advent Children, the action, the story, the graphics, all of it, the music, it's all beautiful. And it's a great movie. So, and Loki, you better save me a spot on your panel when you review that sucker. But anyway, guys, yeah, I think this has been a good stream. I think we've pretty well dissected this one. I hope y'all enjoy this if you watched it live or if you catch it on the replay and everything. Guys, do you have anything you want to plug before we sign off?
Well, you can catch me on YouTube or Twitter as Jane Theory. I review film and television shows with some occasional commentary on the craziness of entertainment.
Chad, she was going.
I'm done.
Okay. So just my own channel. You can find me on The Chat is Great. That's my YouTube channel.
Okay.
As well as if you want to hear my vocals, you can find me on S Mule. Just recently uploaded "Devil Went Down to Georgia."
Ooh.
Old country classic.
Oh, I love that song. Love that
Okay,
song.
I'll post it in the chat then.
Yeah, by all means. Well, anything else you want? Anything else you want to add, Chad, or anything? Or was that it? The devil does stuff.
Just 1 second. Sorry, just 1 second. I just want to check one thing. I'll be right back in about 10 seconds.
Okay. And to the chat, to Med2, welcome, sir. Glad you could pop in for a few minutes. I hope you can, if you get a chance, catch us on the replay. So, but as for myself, everybody, you know what I do here on my channel. And for those that might catch us on the replay, I cover pop culture from the 80s and the 90s and into the modern era. I'm working on reviewing Babylon 5 currently. I'm going to eventually start working on some other projects, some other series and so on, and collaborating with other people like Jane and Chad here. And guys, this has been fun. And you know, you're always welcome here, and you are officially ambassadors. So
we are all Kosh.
Yes. And I can give me just a minute because I used this one yesterday. Yes, we are all Kosh. But coming up this weekend, guys, on the Ambassadorial Wings Saturday night edition, we're going to be reviewing Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. So be sure and tune in for that. And then, of course, next week, we'll start the merry-go-round all over again, and I'm more than happy to be here to do it for you. So, no, this was Yulkesh. This was the slightly more sinister and much more malevolent Vorlon of the two. But, Chad, were you able to look up what you were going to look up, bud? Chad? Earth to Chad. Come in, Chad.
Sorry about that. I muted myself for a moment there.
That's okay.
So, no, I'm going to post what I was looking for in the chat as well. Basically, You mentioned you're a fan of Harry's theme.
Yes.
I don't know if you ever played Xenogears.
I can't say that I have.
Okay, there is a piece of music from Xenogears. Yeah, there's a piece of music from Xenogears that absolutely emulates Ares' theme, but at the same time destroys it in terms of heartfelt quality. So I'm just looking for the particular theme itself, but I'll post it in the chat.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. Well, folks, that is all for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, this is the Ambassadors signing off.